Hey, what's up everybody, Commander Radix here, bringing you a new video, a new episode of Transformers lore as it is. And today's going to be a bit different from my usual lore videos in the sense that we're not going to be looking at the lore of the Transformers universe in an in-universe perspective. Today we're going in an out-of-universe perspective. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the, what am I doing? I'm covering the reading order for IDW's Hasbro Universe. Or at least this will be the first part of my series talking through the order of the Hasbro Universe. I think it's going to be in about 10 parts. In 2005, IDW started a brand new universe with their properties from Hasbro. It didn't really coalesce into one universe until about like 2016-ish, but the case still stands that the Hasbro Universe was born in 2005 with the release of Transformers Infiltration number 0. IDW was relaunching their classic Hasbro titles with a more modern-day appeal, more down-to-earth, a bit more realistic, but still keeping what people loved about the original franchises. And I fell in love with the IDW universe when it began, so I think it would be a good time to just go over the reading order for that universe. And we're going to talk about how I've came to the reading order. The whole point of this series is to point out this comes before this because this happens, stuff like that. We're also going to be trying to pinpoint the years different stories take place so you can see how it goes throughout the years. I used to have a spreadsheet detailing the order of the IDW universe. That will be coming back. On the final episode of this series, there will be a complete list of the entire IDW Hasbro universe that will be available for you to look for your reading pleasure. This is a chronological reading order. Most of it's going to be in chronological order. There are going to be some changes in the order where I think, it just might be best if you read this before this, even though the bulk of it happens before something else, or something like that. I won't try to pinpoint the exact hour and day everything happens to get an exact order like that. That's insane and probably won't actually work. So while it's focused on being an in-universe order, a chronological order, there's still going to be some compromises made for reading pleasure. For the most part, flashbacks are going to be treated as flashbacks, as in the scene that is used to frame the flashback will be the anchor as to where I put it on the timeline. For example, a huge bulk of the Shadow Play arc in More Than Meets the Eye takes place just before or after? Takes place a bit before Megatron Origin, I believe, or after. I can't remember off the top of my head. But it happens in that pre-war time period, while it's framed through a conversation being made in the 2010s. That will be placed in the 2010s and not way back then, because it's a flashback with a framing device. Now, if there happens to be like a spotlight where a huge portion of the main story takes place in ancient times, and like the very last panel is someone discovering a Transformer that was lost in that battle in the modern day, it's going to be placed largely in the ancient times part. You'd be surprised how many spotlights fall into this category. And while I'm not talking about the entire story, this isn't a timeline video per se, it's an order video. I will be, you can't talk about the reading order without talking about some stuff from the plot. There will be massive spoilers. If you just want to read through the universe and not want any spoilers, wait to the last episode and then look at the order in the description. So far, I'm planning it to be 10 episodes. We'll see if that changes as time goes on, but part 1 will be sort of the beginning of the Transformers, with the Simon Furman era writing the Transformers comics, up until about when he gets kicked off and All Hail Megatron begins. Part 2 will be the little All Hail Megatron era. It might be a shorter video, but the All Hail Megatron era does sort of have its own atmosphere to it. Let me be clear that a lot of people use the term Phase 1 and Phase 2 to divide the IDW universe. I disagree with that classification, especially when there's a lot of variation between eras within Phase 1 and Phase 2, and the break from the Costa era into the Roberts Barber era isn't that big of a break. It was originally advertised as the main ongoing was just going to be split into 2 series, like it was just billed as a continuation of the Costa era. So I think dividing Phase 1 and Phase 2 is good for marketing purposes, but not really for actually looking at the timeline and the order of the IDW universe. That's why this isn't a Episode 1 Phase 1, Episode 2 Phase 2 thing, because it's a little more complicated than that. So we have Episode 1 will be this, the Furman era, Episode 2, All Hail Megatron, Episode 3 will be this, what's called Season 1 of G.I. Joe. This is the IDW G.I. Joe books up until the death of Cobra Commander. Episode 4 will be the Costa era Transformer comics, including Last Stand on the Wreckers and stuff like that. Episode 5 will be Season 2 of G.I. Joe, focusing on the Cobra Civil War, Cobra Command, Target, Snake Eyes, that stuff. We're going in order of... These episodes are going in order by publication. For example, we're dealing with 2005 to 2008 stuff this video, then next is like 2008, 2009, and so on. We're dealing with a publication order to like sort of digest this stuff, but we're putting it into a reading order as each episode goes on in universe chronologically. Episode 5 is G.I. Joe Season 2. Episode 6 will be the Barbara Roberts era, you know, the beginning of More Than Meets the Eye and Robots in Disguise, concluding with Dark Cybertron. Episode 7 will be G.I. Joe Season 3. Episode 8 will deal with the post-Dark Cybertron era, the Barbara, Roberts, and Scott era, when you have Windblade added to the mix, and that will end at about just before Revolution, I think. Episode 9 will be G.I. Joe Season 4, which is mostly the fall of G.I. Joe and Snake Eyes, Agent of Cobra. Then Episode 10 will be the Hasbro Universe, though I'm considering dividing the Hasbro Universe episode into 3 episodes, leading up to Revolution and Revolution, leading up to First Strike and First Strike, and leading up to Unicron and Unicron. But we'll have to see when we get there, we'll have to see how long that actually turns out being. But for now, we start with a very simple timeline where IDW is just starting the Transformers stuff. They get Simon Furman, sort of the godfather of Transformer stories, and they get Simon Furman to build his own primary universe from scratch. And he creates the 6-issue well, 5 issues, because there's an issue 0 released in 2005, but the 6-issue miniseries Transformers Infiltration, a very simple series, a very concentrated plot of these Transformers are on Earth, these humans discover them, and they realize that there's a bigger universe out there. 6 issues lays down the foundation for an entire universe. Unlike the current second IDW universe, which is like several issues in and the war hasn't started yet, the IDW universe has a very natural world-building approach, as opposed to setting out trying to start up a new in-depth, unique universe. It sort of evolves on its own. Now, we are told that Transformers Infiltration takes place in 2006. It's on the back of the blurbs. Other material will later confirm that it does take place in 2006. So our timeline starts in 2006 with issues 0 through 6 of Transformers Infiltration. Simultaneously released with Transformers Infiltration later comes out a 4-issue miniseries called Transformers Stormbringer, which is set on Cybertron. So they look at Infiltration as the Transformers on Earth. The 4-issue miniseries Stormbringer is what are they up to on Cybertron, and they happen at the exact same time. There's a lot of points where they cross over, so things get a little bit complicated once Stormbringer comes in, because now we're interweaving these plots. But ultimately, the order of Infiltration with Stormbringer is Infiltration number 0, 1, 2, and 3, then Infiltration number 4, and if Infiltration issue number 4 has Ironhide send a message out to Optimus Prime, and you see a little bit of the conversation between Megatron and Razorclaw over what to do with Thunderwing, who's tearing apart Cybertron. Then we go to Stormbringer issue number 1, where we see Optimus Prime get Ironhide's message. Then we go to Stormbringer issue number 2. Then number 3, where we see the conversation between Megatron and Razorclaw that took place at the end of Infiltration number 4. So catching up Stormbringer to Infiltration. After that, we go to Infiltration number 5 to see the Megatron's follow-up on the end of that conversation with Razorclaw, and how the Decepticons attack the Decepticon bunker Megatron's in, so we see where he goes from that conversation. Then we go to Stormbringer number 4, in which Optimus Prime leaves Cybertron to go to Earth, and then we finish with Infiltration number 6, when we see Optimus Prime arrive on Earth. So that's the order with Infiltration and Stormbringer. Infiltration ends with Megatron declaring that Phase 2 has begun on Earth. Phase 2 is Escalation, in which the Decepticons, from a secret position, try to influence the countries of the world to go to war with each other to weaken the native population. So the next few comics we have deals with the Decepticons trying to start World War III, essentially. And we can go to the next miniseries, New Avengers Transformers, which is a 4-issue miniseries where the Autobots and the Avengers try to stop the Decepticons and Doctor Doom from starting a World War III by using Doctor Doom's Psychoprism from agitating the populations of Symkaria and Latveria into starting war. The continuity of New Avengers Transformers is a little bit weird in the situation of Megatron's body, because Megatron clearly has a Earth body that turns into a gun mode in New Avengers Transformers, but we see him get that body much later on, so he shouldn't have that body at that time. He should still be in his Cybertronian tank body, but that's just a small continuity issue. Some people say New Avengers and Transformers doesn't take place in the IDW universe, which is simply not the case. It introduces Ramjet, and Ramjet has a key part in later IDW issues where his characterization is built on from New Avengers Transformers. Essentially, he leaves the Decepticons at the end of New Avengers, and then the next we see him, he's a renegade running from the Decepticons. So that's sort of how that works out. Wheeljack also, I believe it's Wheeljack, who starts to reference the events of New Avengers Transformers in Robots in Disguise, but gets cut short because he can't reference the incident in Latveria, because Latveria is a Marvel trademarked thing. But it does take place in the IDW universe after Infiltration. Next, we have the natural sequel to Transformers Infiltration, written by Simon Furman, Transformers Escalation. A lot of these stories that make up the bulk of this era end in Asian, hence why it's also called the Asians era. But Transformers Escalation is a 6-issue miniseries, a sequel to Infiltration, but has to happen after New Avengers. We see Megatron select his new Earth gun mode, and part of the plot revolves around him using this new mode, and Optimus Prime seeing his gun mode for the first time. So it's a bit weird how there's a little continuity error with New Avengers, but whatever. Now, Escalation pretty much follows straight forward through issues 1 through 6, but now we need to talk about Transformers Spotlight, which was a series running alongside the IDW Transformers books that focused on an individual character at some random point in the timeline. Escalation is when the main story starts to reference that there's a wider universe with Transformers Spotlight. In Escalation number 1, Optimus Prime finds information that they aren't the first Transformers to visit Earth, with evidence of both Shockwave and Soundwave having been on Earth. So that references Spotlight Shockwave and Spotlight Soundwave. Spotlight Shockwave stretches a pretty wide period of time, although the main point of it happens around during the Ice Age, though the beginning, I believe, takes place around 600,000 years ago, and the last scene is in 2006. It explains where Ultra Energon and Ore-16 came from that were in Infiltration and Stormbringer, and how Shockwave has this whole Energon scheme, putting these different powerful Energons throughout space, and then he fights the Dinobots. There's a Transformers lore video on that. Go look up Transformers lore Spotlight Shockwave, and you'll find that story. We will put a date onto when Shockwave fought the Dinobots on prehistoric Earth later on, but it won't pop up here, so we're gonna put this just under the generic title of The Ice Age. It takes place in the Ice Age, which I believe puts it at the earliest point in the timeline we have so far. Meanwhile, Spotlight Soundwave gives us an exact day on the first page. The main bulk of the story takes place in 1984, with one scene taking place in 1985 when the human organization Skywatch discovers Laserbeak and Ravage, and then at some point in the modern days when Soundwave gets bought as a cassette player. But the bulk of it takes place in 1984, so we'll place Spotlight Soundwave in 1984 on the timeline. After Transformers Escalation number 2, there's a murder mystery. Sunstreaker's been taken by the Machination, and Optimus Prime wants to find out who done it, so Optimus Prime calls for reinforcements. One of those reinforcements is the detective Nightbeat, who had his own Spotlight, and at the end of Spotlight Nightbeat is Optimus Prime calling Nightbeat to go to Earth. So we can place Spotlight Nightbeat after Transformers Escalation number 2. In Escalation number 3, Nightbeat arrives on Earth along with Hardhead and Hot Rod. Now, Hot Rod has had his own spotlight at this point, but we don't really know when it takes place. It takes place in the fairly recent past, although it also spans a few years in that story alone. We can say Spotlight Hot Rod happens sometime in the 20th century, not over 100 years ago, but somewhere fairly recently in the 1900s. In Transformers Escalation number 5, we see the Machination talking to their leader, who is a Cybertronian, which will later be revealed to be Scorponok, who is damaged. Now, how did Scorponok end up on Earth with a damaged head? That happens in Spotlight Ultra Magnus, which they reference happens 29 stellar cycles ago, which puts Spotlight Ultra Magnus, the bulk of it, in 1988. So Scorponok would come to Earth in 1988, so we know where Spotlight Ultra Magnus goes. And if I'm not clear, the Spotlight Ultra Magnus is Ultra Magnus versus Scorponok, and it sort of gives backstory, kind of just more to Scorponok than to Ultra Magnus, but you get the idea. Finally, by Transformers Escalation number 6, you probably should have read Spotlight 6 Shot by that point. Spotlight 6 Shot deals with 6 Shot dealing with the Reapers, and issue number 6 of Escalation reveals 6 Shot going over to Earth with the Reapers in hot pursuit. I would put that, some point in the recent past, sort of in the similar place as Hot Rod. So we'll put Spotlight 6 Shot and his events with the Reapers at some point in the 1900s, some point in the 20th century. In the aftermath of Transformers Escalation, there are a few spotlights. Spotlight Ramjet deals with Ramjet after the events of New Avengers Transformers, and his scheme, he has this whole scheme develop while Escalation is taking place. You see panel for panel that while this is happening in Escalation, Ramjet is doing this, but the very last scene happens after the last scene of Escalation. So you can put it happens mostly at the same time as Escalation. For reading order purposes, stick it right after Escalation. Spotlight Optimus Prime deals with the aftermath of Escalation. Optimus Prime almost dies during Escalation and senses the spirit of Nova Prime in the intraspace, I think it's called, or infraspace. And in Spotlight Optimus Prime, he's like, I almost died, and I felt a presence in the afterlife. Let me figure out what happened to Nova Prime. So that he goes on that quest. So Optimus Prime happens after Escalation, after Ramjet, but also it references a few other spotlights, because there's a scene where Optimus Prime is sitting and just listening to what's going on across the universe, and a lot of the messages he's picking up has to do with events from other spotlights, including Springer reports on the health of Cup, Wheelie's message looking for help reaches Optimus Prime, and Hound is following up on Sideswipe wanting to help on Earth. These events all tie into previous spotlights. Cup got messed up pretty bad during the events of Spotlight Cup, and in Spotlight Optimus Prime, Springer's saying Cup's doing better now. So that suggests there's been a medical period where Cup's been seen to, which he received medical attention at the end of Spotlight Cup, and this sounds like it's been a while since he's received attention. I would put Spotlight Cup in a safe area sometime, like maybe after Transformers Infiltration, so we give the Escalation era in New Avengers like his time to recover. So I would put Spotlight Cup after Infiltration number 6, or at least before New Avengers. Sideswipe confronting Optimus Prime wanting to help in the search for Sunstreaker happened in Transformers Spotlight Galvatron. So we can put Spotlight Galvatron before Spotlight Optimus Prime, but after Escalation, after Spotlight Ramjet. Spotlight Wheelie is a little bit weird, because at the beginning you see it's clearly taking place during the time period that there is a war on Cybertron, and Stormbringer establishes that Cybertron's been abandoned since like the 1500s. So that message Wheelie is sending out to Optimus Prime has to have been sent from far away, and Prime is only getting it now. Later on, it will be revealed that the planet Wheelie got stranded on is also like moving through time differently, so it's really hard to pinpoint where Wheelie is in time, because that planet is out of sync with time and is doing its own thing. And later on it's revealed that it's because of an Energon planted by Shockwave, which means we can probably put Spotlight Wheelie after Spotlight Shockwave, before Cybertron's abandoned, but after Shockwave sent Energon out into space. So we'll put Spotlight Wheelie sometime. Now we get into the sequel miniseries for Transformers Escalation called Transformers Devastation. 6-shot arrives. It's sort of like this big finale, even though it's not the real finale. But like the stakes are raised in Devastation. No longer are the Decepticons trying to be that secret, although they still kind of operate in secret. But some spotlights are referenced. In Devastation number 5, Prowl references the fact that the Autobot prison of Garrus 9 has fallen. We see Garrus 9 fall in Spotlight RC, so we can put Spotlight RC immediately before Transformers Devastation number 5. There's also Spotlight Grimlock, which happens directly after Devastation. At the end of Devastation, the Autobots abandon Earth, and Spotlight Grimlock sort of deals with the humans trying to deal with the fact that the Autobots are gone while they're activating Grimlock. So Spotlight Grimlock happens right after Devastation number 6. There are 2 more spotlights that were released before we get into the next main chapter of the Asians era, Revelation. Spotlight Blaster and Spotlight Mirage. Spotlight Blaster doesn't really have much information as to when it takes place besides now-ish, in the modern era, when the stories are happening. Publication-wise, it came out before Spotlight RC, and I believe it's also packaged right before RC in the Phase 1 collections. So we're just going to stick Spotlight Blaster right before Spotlight RC, in the middle of Devastation, just because it fits there, and there's nothing that really points to when Blaster takes place beyond this time period. Spotlight Mirage is a bit different. Spotlight Mirage, when it came out, we had no idea what was going on with Spotlight Mirage. It didn't even seem to take place in continuity because Mirage is on Earth. In fact, there are a lot of Autobots on Earth and stuff like that. There's this whole incident in space, so we're thinking maybe it happens at some point when the Autobots left for space, but then again, that doesn't really fit. There's this whole weird thing called the Zodiac energy that's popped out of nowhere. People, when Spotlight Mirage came out, they're like, okay, is Mirage an Elseworlds thing? Does Spotlight Mirage even happen in the IDW universe? And there was that question. Later on, probably unintentionally, a situation occurs in which you can go, oh, Spotlight Mirage could easily fit there just fine. And then later issues will reference Spotlight Mirage, so we know exactly when Spotlight Mirage takes place, but it won't take place in this era of Transformers. It will happen later on in the future. So we'll stick Spotlight Mirage in some, later category after most stuff we talk about here, if not everything we talk about in this episode. After Transformers Devastation comes Transformers Revelation. Now, Revelation was supposed to be another 6-issue miniseries. However, at this point, IDW wants to get new readers. So what they want is to have a huge, explosive event where the Decepticons take over everything. That would get in the headlines, that will attract new readers. So they hire a new writer to do that story, and they tell Furman, we can't give you another 6-issue miniseries to resolve your Asians saga that you've been meticulously planning. What we can give you is 4 spotlights. So try to condense your main story into 4 spotlights. And also we'll give you a 5-issue miniseries to wrap up the plots with your side characters that are doing side things, not the main plot. So first comes that 4-issue miniseries that's actually just 4 spotlights, Transformers Revelation, which is Spotlight Cyclonus, Spotlight Hardhead, Spotlight Double Dealer, and Spotlight Sideswipe. Now, because Revelation was so cramped and rushed for time, one of the key points in Devastation is Ironhide being blown up and the Autobots trying to get Ironhide back. And then Revelation just kind of ignores that plot because there's not enough time. The artist Nick Roche draws in an extra page that says, oh, and they get Ironhide between the pages. Because that's kind of a big thing that's left unresolved until you just see, oh, Ironhide's back, I guess. So, Transformers Spotlight Cyclonus Interlude is a little page, almost done tongue-in-cheek, by Nick Roche that resolves the Ironhide issue. So, stick that right after Spotlight Cyclonus in Revelation so you can see what happens to Ironhide. After Revelation, we have Transformers Maximum Dinobots, a 5-issue miniseries that was where Furman had to wrap up his side plots with his side characters like Shockwave, Soundwave, the Dinobots, and Scorponok, and Hot Rod, I guess, and Sunstreaker. That didn't have to do with the main overarching universal threat in Revelation. I should state that so far, all of our main story stuff still take place in 2006. So Maximum Dinobots is a very straightforward 5-issue miniseries, happens after Revelation. We don't really need to go into any more detail than that. Also released around this time is a 4-issue miniseries written by Eric Holmes, called Transformers Megatron Origin, which deals with the beginning of the Great War between the Autobots and the Decepticons 4 million years ago. Originally, when it was released, it was meant to be part of the Dreamwave universe, but later IDW books would incorporate Megatron Origin into the IDW universe. So Megatron Origin does take place in the IDW universe. And in theory, also the Dreamwave universe, they both can claim it, but we're talking about the IDW timeline here. Megatron Origin happens in the IDW universe, and that makes it the earliest point in our timeline, taking place 4 million years ago, so you can see the beginning of the war. Now that largely wraps up the Furman era before we enter All Hell Megatron, where everything gets explosive. But there are some little points I want to talk about that we can also fit into the timeline. First is Transformers Mosaics. Transformers Mosaic was a really fan fiction. It was an effort by fans to make their own Transformers stories. It was one-page comics written by different people, different fans who drew it, but initially weren't supposed to be canon. Then IDW started publishing Transformers Mosaic in the pages of their IDW Transformer comics, which puts it up in the air. Is it really canon? And the official story is no, it's not canon. Although there were a few IDW-centric mosaics that clearly could take place in the IDW universe, were meant to take place in the IDW universe. And then finally, Simon Furman himself wrote a Transformers mosaic called Hail and Farewell, which was supposedly his last entry into the IDW universe, and he said it's canon. Here's the thing, it doesn't fit in canon. All Hell Megatron quickly retcons Hail and Farewell, so that Hail and Farewell didn't actually happen. And you can make the argument, well, I guess it was a mosaic, I guess it wasn't actually canon, except it was meant to be canon, but the writer ignored that, and now it's not canon. So there's always this element of mosaics can't be canon, but then Transformers Mosaic Dead Men's Boots came out, which was set during the time period of Last Stand of the Wreckers, which we'll get into in a future video, but it was canon. It was written by James Roberts, the official writer, and published in an IDW book. And everyone has the consensus that Dead Men's Boot is canon, which we'll stick that some point in the future, and then we'll give it a date once we get to Last Stand of the Wreckers in our timeline. So, the IDW universe is over. I have the opinion that there are some mosaics that were published in IDW comics that were set in the IDW universe that can fit just fine in the IDW universe. And the universe is over, nothing's going to contradict them now. So, let's just, for funsies, stick them into the timeline, see where they would fit, and realize, hey, they don't make any contradictions whatsoever. First is Feeling Yellow, which deals with Sunstreaker, in between Infiltration and Escalation. We can stick that after Infiltration, like directly after Infiltration, and it sets the seeds for Escalation. Then there's Rank, which I also believe takes place after Infiltration number 6, where Optimus Prime strips Prowl of his rank a little bit. It's kind of iffy wording, but ultimately I interpret it as Optimus Prime saying, I'm taking direct control of the Autobots on Earth. You know, that conversation he had with Prowl, and how Prowl is kind of upset that he's being put down the chain of command, on Earth at least. So Feeling Yellow and Rank were both published in IDW's books. They fit into the timeline perfectly. Let's stick them there. Hail and Farewell was meant to be canon, written by Simon Furman, but it cannot fit into canon, we cannot put it in the timeline. And then Dead Men's Boots does fit in later on in the timeline. I should also reference Transformers Evolution's Hearts of Steel. It was meant to be an Elseworlds 6-issue miniseries where what if the Transformers landed on Earth in 1867 and helped John Henry fight against, some evil industrial people. And all these Transformers turn into steampunk stuff. Meant to be an Elseworlds 6-issue miniseries released around this time that everyone was like, okay, that's a nice little Elseworlds story. Later on, it will be revealed that it does take place in the IDW universe. And you might be asking, how does it take place in the IDW universe when you have, like, Starscream and Bumblebee in 1867? But they clearly don't reference what happened in 1867 in Transformers Infiltration. We'll get to that explanation later. But it's fairly genius, I think, how Hearts of Steel fits into the IDW universe. So we'll stick that in 1867. So, at the end of this first part of the IDW reading order, this is what our timeline should look like. 4 million years ago, we have Transformers Megatron Origin issues 1 through 4. During the Ice Age, we have Transformers Spotlight Shockwave. At some point after Spotlight Shockwave, we have Spotlight Wheelie. In 1867, we have Transformers Evolutions Hearts of Steel number 1 through 4. At some unidentified point in the 20th century, we have Spotlight Six Shot and then Spotlight Hot Rod. 1984, Spotlight Soundwave. 1988, Spotlight Ultra Magnus. And then 2006 is where we have the big bulk of our story. Transformers Infiltration number 0 through 4. Transformers Stormbringer number 1 through 3. Infiltration number 5. Stormbringer number 4. Infiltration number 6. Followed by that, we have, if you want to include them, Transformers Mosaic Feeling Yellow and Rank. Then we have Spotlight Cup, followed by New Avengers Transformers number 1 through 4. Then we have Transformers Escalation number 1 through 2, Spotlight Nightbeat, then Escalation number 3 through 6, followed up by Spotlight Ramjet. Then we have Spotlight Galvatron, Spotlight Optimus Prime. Then we get into Transformers Devastation 1 through 4, Spotlight Blaster, Spotlight RC, then Devastation number 5 through 6, followed up by Spotlight Grimlock. Then we have Revelation, which comes through Spotlight Cyclonus, the Spotlight Cyclonus Interlude, Spotlight Hardhead, Spotlight Double Dealer, and Spotlight Sideswipe. Then we go into Transformers Maximum Dinobots number 1 through 5, wrapping up the Furman era of Transformers. And then sometime in the future, sometime later, we'll have Transformers Spotlight Mirage and Transformers Mosaic Dead Men's Boots. That's what we got so far. Join me next time when we enter the all-hail Megatron era as the Transformers step out of the shadows and begin an occupation of Earth. But thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Transformers Lore. I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you're hyped for this, as I am, as we piece together the timeline for the IDW Universe. All my links to social media are in the description. And yeah, have a great day, ladies and gentlemen.